Welcome, everyone. This is the second week of our Focus Fridays initiative. In our leadership forum today, we've got a great alumnus of Utah State, Mark Holland. And before we get started with Mark, I just want to put in a plug for next Friday. We're really excited. Next Friday, most of our programming will center all around one employer. It's a little unusual for us. So it's going to be Zion's Bank Day at the Huntsman School. The leadership forum, it'll be a little different format, more traditional lecture, not this conversation, from Leanne Linderman, who is the Executive Vice President at Zion's. She's actually the 2016 Utah Banker of the Year. So we're excited to have Leanne here, and then they're bringing 10 other executives for 2 different panels after Ms. Linderman is finished. So I hope all of you come. I'll just throw out one fact that I didn't know when we spoke with some of the Utah State alumni at Zion's. This was about 4 months ago. They had 1,300 openings throughout the Zion system, and they're all over the West, right? This is not just a bank in Utah. And before you think about, if you think about Zion's and say, well, I'm not studying finance and economics, so I'm not really interested in that. 700 of those 1,300 openings were in data analytics. Right? This is the golden age of data. And so if you think about a corporation as large as Zion's, they're going to have opportunities across the breadth of the majors that we offer here. So I really encourage you to come next week for Zion's Day. And so with that, we're happy to welcome Mark Holland. Mark and I have known each other since our undergraduate days at Utah State. You all have on your chairs a little bio sketch of Mark. So I won't go into that. We'll discuss some of that. But I think Mark wanted to start with a question for the audience.
Yeah, if you don't mind. In fact, let me apologize. We started 3 minutes late. Now, at Intermountain Staffing, if you come into a meeting 1 to 3 minutes late, you get to choose your song that you're going to sing for us. And if you come in later than 3 minutes, then the group gets to choose the song. Now, the only other rule is that if at any time during your performance, anyone in the audience feels like that song is unacceptable, then they can call the ball and have you restart and say, we need more energy, we need more clarity, whatever the case may be. So anyway, sorry about starting late there. Another best practice that we like to do at Intermountain Staffing is to start each of our meetings with a get on board question, a warm-up question, if you will. And as in my title as CEO, one of my primary responsibilities is kind of keeping this corporate culture thing going. And so we find that as we get to know each other better, we understand each other a little better, our teams strengthen. And so if I could, I'd like to start with the get on board question. Now, we won't be able to get through everyone today, but if there are 3 or 4 or 5 people that would be willing to share, I'd really appreciate that. And there's some Intermountain swag somewhere around here. So afterwards, if you do participate, I'd love to have you come up and shake my hand. And if you want to choose a water bottle or a stress ball, or we have a little short, fat Intermountain man you'd like to see as well, kind of groovy stuff. So if you participate, please come see me afterwards. So here's the warm-up question. So tell us about something important that you've done this summer. And then the only rule is if the example has been used once, then move on to something else. So I'll start. And as I look over this summer, I think the very most important thing that I've done, Maddie, where are you? Okay, raise your hand. So there's my daughter, Maddie. She's my oldest. She's 18, just starting at Utah State. And I was talking with actually the wife of the president of Zion's Bank this morning, Jess Lee Anderson. And we were talking about this very topic, about your oldest leaving home. And she said it's just kind of so emotional because your head is in one place and your heart is in the other. And she nailed it exactly for me. I'm excited that Maddie is spreading her wings and growing and ready to move on, but at the same time, it just tears my heart apart that I'm losing my little girl. And so, anyway, that's the hardest thing I've done, is send Maddie to Aggie Land, although I'm so excited to have you here, Maddie. Okay, so there's an example of a get on board question with a response. And who has the courage to tell us about something important that they did this summer? All right, please. If you tell us your name and then, yeah.
My name is Travis Nilsson. Something important I did this summer is I graduated with my bachelor's in work psychology from BYU, Idaho, and then I started the Master's of Human Resource program here.
Welcome to Utah State. Go Ags. Yeah, thank you.
Bill Harding. I took all of my savings and finished my basement apartment so that my dad could close the machine shop and move into our basement and have some semblance of a comfortable retirement.
Wow.
For you.
Well done, son. It's awesome. Yeah. Wow, two great comments. Couple more? Yeah, please. Your name? And we have to have you speak up.
My name is Medina. My last name is Long.
Okay.
I'm not even going to further involve it. I immersed myself in a new culture and reacquainted myself with another culture.
And so do you mind sharing what that culture was in both cases?
I was raised in Ukraine, and it's very, very different from the U.S., and there's this internal conflict when you're growing up between those two cultures. And wow, that's so loud. And I guess you could say the two cultures made friends in my head.
Yeah.
So that, and also I lived in Europe, Spain, basically. That was the new culture.
Oh, tough gig. Thank you for sharing. One more? Anybody else willing to share something important they did this summer? Okay, then we'll wrap up. Thank you.
The risk of being maybe too business-oriented, I implemented a change management structure as we transitioned a portion of our business into a new employee skill set.
Okay, and what's your business?
So I ran my own business in Dallas, and then as I decided to come to Utah State to do my master's degree, I had to train and implement someone to run my business in my place.
Wow, great. We just completed an acquisition in the greater Dallas market, so
Great.
love that area, lots of growth, lots of excitement. Boy, yeah, just however oil goes, that's the way Dallas is going though, isn't it?
Sure, yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing. Okay, well, so if you've had a chance to share, please come up and see me afterwards. We'll give you some swag. And
Great.
With that, Dave.
Thank you. I love
Take it
this
easy on me.
participation. We'll see if we can continue that throughout this 30, 40 minutes. So Mark, I want to start off with what you're doing today. So you're currently CEO at two companies, Intermountain Staffing and Ascend HR Solutions. So tell us, what's the typical day for you?
Yeah, and just in the last few months, Dave, we've started a third company that is rolling. This is very exciting. It's a medical staffing company. By the way, we have 14 doctors out, and at 10, you're at break even. So that's quite exciting. We've got a lot of fun stuff going there. It used to be that, I started in '92 at Intermountain, and we had a couple of offices. We had a ton of debt. And so resources were tight. And back then, if the toilet was plugged, we had to figure out how to get it unplugged. And if we had an angry employee, I was down trying to diffuse the situation. I remember at one client, they smashed marshmallow, like Rice Krispie treats, into Christmas trees or Easter bunnies or whatever. I was on the line because we didn't have people show up. And so that's kind of, as we've grown, we've become a little more specialized. My three principal roles, as I see them now, are strategy, kind of figuring out how we're going to get where we want to go, human capital development, working on my teams and making sure the culture is intact, and then special projects. So I'm happy to talk a little more about that, or if you want
that'd be great.
a couple of examples. So I mentioned this opportunity in Dallas. For 8 months, we worked with the company and finally got the acquisition done August 1. They have 6 offices mostly in the Texas area, so it increased our size by 35%. This whole idea of the cultures are just different. They've got great people, and so our job is trying to figure out how not to upset anyone enough to leave, and then move it from there to integration into the company, and then figuring out what they do well and what we do well. So that's one of the special projects that I've been working on. I mentioned this medical staffing company. We went from no employees to we're at 8 employees now, and we place docs throughout the United States. It's a very interesting business. A lot different than Intermountain Staffing. Intermountain Staffing focuses on assembly, manufacturing, kind of frontline people. And so they're two opposite ends of the spectrum, and both equally rewarding in different ways. So on this culture side, this integration with with the staffing business has been good because it's helped us kind of re-examine what we're good at and what we need to start letting go and what they're good at and how do we bring this all together. Well, anyway, a few ideas.
Yeah, that's great. So what were your early years like? Where did you grow up?
So I was born in Salt Lake and spent my first, 12 years or so there. I grew up in a single mom family, and my dad died when I was 5. And, that had a lot to do with the shaping of who I am, both good and bad. One of the dysfunctions that come out of that is my mom has a high school education, and so while she always provided, things were lean. We were in the lowest echelon of income, renting houses and trying to pay bills and figure all that stuff out. I have this in the back of my mind, this constant pressure, it ebbs and flows, about the fear of financial failure. And a lot of weird things come out of that, a lot of positive things too. It's a driver. So I moved 20 times my first 20 years. That also created a lot of things. For me, it's very important to keep my family around me. It just warms my heart that Maddie's here. My closest friends, as you know, our Aggie friends are like family. We get together a lot. And so I think that's probably a function of not having any of those lasting relationships in my childhood. I think early on, Salt Lake, then we moved to Tucson for a few years and ended up in a really tough neighborhood. And it's a good thing that we got out of there because I would not be here today had that been the case. It was just not a good path. The next step brought us to Cache Valley, which is, any Bobcats in the room from Skyview? Hey, really? Right on. Go Bobcats. In Smithfield, I got inculcated into the kind of the agricultural world, and it's up the break of dawn and working until the work's done. If it's snowing, it doesn't matter. If you're sick, it doesn't matter. And so I think I really had a work ethic installed in me. My grandpa had a ranch, and a lot of that background came there. So I'm really thankful for that. It was hard work, but it was always rewarding. My grandpa always let you know. He helped you build a self-appreciation for what you've done. Look at the acre of fence you just painted. How does that feel? Well, good to be done. But it also was, and so I'm very appreciative of the fact that I have that in my background.
Yeah. So when you were at Utah State, did you have an idea of what you wanted to do for a career?
No, not even. At first I thought I was going to be a landscape architect. I had some friends that had some business stuff, so I ended up over here. But really, even when I graduated, I don't know if it's unusual, that I really didn't know what I wanted to do. So I ended up getting a job as a financial planner, a stockbroker. And I think probably more important for me than what I did was where I did it. People don't leave companies, they leave bosses. And so finding and as I think about this, as you think about your careers, anything I can do to encourage you to get to understand who your boss is going to be, what the corporate culture is like, talk to lots of people, that kind of engagement. I found that if I liked my boss, I loved my job. And so I went through a couple of morphs through my career and ended up where I am. Maybe not a typical path, maybe it is a typical path.
There is no typical path, right? So tell me some of the leadership experiences you had at Utah State.
While I was here?
Yeah.
Well, so I was very involved at Utah State, and I have been since I graduated, by the way. I love Utah State. Did so many great things to shape my life and help me give the opportunities that I have today. I was involved with student government. Any student government groupies in here? Oh, come on, y'all. All right, yeah. So, okay, there's 4 or 5 of us in here. When I married the theoretical discussions of my kind of academic world and married that with the practical experience I got in student government, it really changed who I was. I get to understand power structures. I had a very interesting experience, and I was involved with a group that ended up getting into some challenges on campus, and we were getting pressures from other groups, and we ended up getting actually university council involved and then state council involved. And, I'm like 21 years old and in the thick of all this stuff, and it was such an amazing, rewarding experience, just seeing all the ebbing and flowing and the different political pressures being brought to bear. And so I think the practical experience of student government, and whether that's student government or getting involved with clubs or other organizations on campus, I just highly recommend. That's where the rubber met the road, and I think it accelerated my learning and management experience and kind of the real life world as well.
I think I was present at the incident that caused some of your challenges. We won't go into that in this nice setting. So after Utah State, or even during it, tell me about that first leadership gig that you had, whether it was here or afterwards.
Yeah. So maybe the very first experiences before Utah State, I was baptized in the Mormon faith. I was not active when I grew up, and occasionally a scoutmaster or Sunday school teacher would get me out. But when I moved to Cache Valley, so let's call it maybe at 17 or so, I had a scoutmaster that really took a personalized interest in me, and I knew he cared about me, as he did all the young men that he worked with. And he got me really thinking about what I wanted to do with my future. I was dating a girl, and marriage was coming down the track, and I just wasn't quite ready for that. And I thought, well, maybe this 2-year mission thing. I didn't know a lot about the church, frankly. In fact, I remember I called the bishop from the ward that I was in, and if any of you are LDS, he's like or not LDS, he's like the minister, right? And I said, hey, I've been thinking about going on a mission. And he got really quiet, and he said, who'd you say you were? So, it was, but anyway, going on a mission. What I found in going was that, coming up from a poverty-driven world, my framing was around things like, well, maybe I'm not good enough. Maybe if you have money, you know something that I don't know. Maybe those opportunities come because of something you have and I don't. And what I found was that if I applied myself, I could do what I wanted to. I could become. I could meet those challenges. I could excel. And maybe the playing field was quite level if I applied myself and worked hard. It was a huge. It doesn't seem like it should be that big of a thing, but it was a huge aha for me to be able to say, if it's to be, it's up to me. It doesn't matter about these other things.
That's great.
Yeah.
So you talked a little bit about the fact that it's not about the company, it's about that boss. But take us through your thought process as you changed jobs, especially early in your career.
Yeah, so my first gig, I was in the financial advising world. Spent 3 years doing that, so stocks and bonds and counseling.
In Utah?
In Utah, downtown Salt Lake. And UBS was the last. It was Payne Weber at the time. That's where so I really loved that gig. You starve for the first couple of years. At least that's the way it was when I started. And I was approaching the third year, getting traction. I was paying all my bills. And things happen in that business where the longer you stay, the more opportunities you have. And so my financial position was accelerating. I was quite happy with it. But I was buying stock for some friends in a small business, a publicly traded company, some of my very closest friends. You remember Steve Baker. And they were looking for leadership. Anyway, they needed a CFO, and if any of you know me, I ended up with the job of CFO, which is just not, it was a crazy, they didn't know and I didn't know. Thought I did. Anyway, the president ended up retiring 4 months later, and I was young and I was inexpensive and I knew the business, and so I became president of that company. They made the offer, and trying to decide if I wanted to leave this one career and move into the next, it's a big decision, guys. It had been a good life. It had been a fairly easy, stress-free life, and I guess maybe in the end that's why I left, because I was getting a little bit bored. So I love what I did there at Globesat Holding Corporation, a spin-off of Utah State. It was me and a bunch of engineers and physicists, and so really, really cool stuff. From there, we got the company turned around. we fulfilled our primary contract, and for the first time in the history of the company in 7 years, we were making money. And one of our board members introduced me to my current partner. And the same kind of thing, things were stable, it was interesting, it was fun, but this company that they introduced me to was in all kinds of trouble, financial and issues with the state and personnel issues, and just, I was single at the time, and so more money and more stock and a greater opportunity, and so off I went. And I think it's probably as much as anything, it was about trying something new and an opportunity to grow and fix, because those first two were definitely turnaround situations, so, yeah.
So what's your greatest challenge today?
Let's see, I think maybe things that are out of the ordinary that we're working on right now. This acquisition that I mentioned is high on my mind. We're a month and a half into it. The numbers are stable and right where we want them to be. I've got several key people that I'm worried about, and I'm spending a lot of time with them, making sure they're happy. There's one guy that I'm anxious about losing. I don't want to lose him because it'll have an impact on us, and so that keeps me up. I spend a lot of time visiting with him and his boss to make sure that we're meeting his needs. And I mentioned this medical startup, and that's a great adventure. I mean, we're self-funding both of these things, and so cash flows are tight for the first time in maybe 10 years. So that's kind of exciting. And yet, we figured out we've got great teams, and learning a new business, a lot of government regulation in the medical staffing business, so that's been fun, interesting to learn about. And yeah, maybe those are the two projects that maybe not keep me up at night, but I'm on high alert to make sure that we nail it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Before we move on to some of the specifics about your hiring style, let me just go back to a little venture you had in college with some of those friends. So I think you had a hand in, or at least were familiar with, the first ever Logan to Salt Lake shuttle company.
Just peripherally.
Right.
That was mostly Gavin Washburn.
Okay.
And so it really,
Gavin works for you now.
Yeah, we're partners in
Right.
two businesses.
Yeah.
Yeah. So roommates in the mid '80s. After there was trouble to be found, it was with Gavin. We had so many wonderful, great adventures. Yeah. So that was his gig more than mine. Stayed in touch forever. He helped me found our HR company. Went to work in the medical staffing arena, and then he's back, and that's what has helped us to launch this medical staffing company through his connections. And yeah.
You were at least a driver on one of those shuttles.
Never.
Never.
Blake Kirby was.
Okay.
Yeah, that's probably what you're thinking of. Yeah.
So let's move on to with any of the three companies. So how do you hire? What are you looking for?
Yeah, it's really different in each of the companies. In the Intermountain staffing side, for me, the most important thing is, when I see somebody for an interview, I want them sitting on the edge of their seat. I want them making eye contact with me. I want them to have researched our company and to be able to ask me intelligent questions. If they can't, as I do interviews, I'm maybe going to get 5, 6 people I'm going to interview, and there's going to be 3 piles, yes, maybe, and no. You go right in the no pile if you haven't done your homework. It doesn't matter what your background is like or how else you do, because I need to know that you're engaged enough to want to know about our organization. Even better, if you'll take the time to find out from other employees in the company what we're about, what I'm about. I'm going to have some pretty creative things that have come my way, and people trying to get in to see me before the interviews. They actually make a difference. In the medical staffing company, it's all about experience. I don't have a long runway to be able to get the company up and running unless I'm going to go to outside capital, which I really do not want to do. We've got several investors, but it's all close-knit. Gavin is one of them. And so there, it's more about getting the experience, and we're relying on relationships from the last 20 years, and have done a very good job of bringing in the best and brightest there. We're capitalized like we need to be, but we also need to hit the ground running so that we can, accelerate that. On the HR side, we look more for specialists. And so this HR-centric world, we're doing more and more consulting. My team's in California right now working on a 450-person opportunity that, you know, be 5 or 8% of our business. So it'd be a very big deal if we can land that. But they're talking with professionals, and we have to really know our stuff there. So maybe 3 different approaches.
Are there any specific questions that you always ask in an interview?
Probably less so than I used to. I mean, I've got a portfolio, you know, 5 or 8 of the same questions, which you've seen in all of the. But it's probably more about the personal engagement and sensing how they're going to interface with our culture. You know, the enthusiasm is one thing, and then depending on the company, the skill sets may be more or less important. Less important on the Intermountain side, because we can teach that. Much more important in the other 2 companies.
So culture is obviously important for you. So what is that, you know, 2 or 3 things that you've tried to consciously build for your workplace culture?
You know, integrity is important to us. It's one of our key words. I think that maybe the things that are the most interesting to me, though, are life balance. Nothing's more important to me than my family, my friends, and that includes work. And I talk to our employees a lot about this. In our business, we're right at peak in the temporary staffing business. And we're twice as busy as we were 5 months ago. And it's just the nature of the business. And so people are stressed, people are working harder than they have been. And I need to make sure that they can support their teams, I can support them, we can support each other in this whole concept of when the dust settles, take the time that you need to refresh and rejuvenate. It's not all about work. It's a means to an end. We love what we do. It's not the most important thing. I think the other thing is humor plays such an important role in what we do in alleviating stress and creating camaraderie. We're a company of rhythms. You know, this get on board question that I talked about, that's one of our rhythms. Daily huddles for 10 minutes. We talk about what our number 1 thing is, what our daily number is. It's a key driver for us, and what our, can't remember the third thing. But my point is that the humor, if that's not inculcated into who you are, it's probably not going to be a very good fit for us. We laugh a lot. There's a lot of practical jokes going on. But I think it's really important because it can be a stressful job. And the ability to not take it too seriously, it's quite compelling for us.
That's great.
Yeah. That answer your question? I don't know.
Yeah. What are some, so big picture, what are some leadership lessons that you've learned, starting from your mom, going way back, and your grandfather, to some of the people you've come across, and just what you've learned from your life experience?
Wow. Well, with my mom, you know, it would be unconditional love and perseverance. For my grandfather, it would be, you know, hard work, put on your pants, go to work, and be careful, be mindful of what you've done. To just take time to reflect on the good job that's been done, and to help others with that. I think as, you know, I've moved on in my career, and I think about these things a lot, being kind of the gatekeeper of culture. You know, assuming good intent, Dave, I really have not appreciated how important that is. In the last 5 or 6 years, I've been on a journey. My brother-in-law is a marriage and family therapist, and he's been coaching me on this whole concept of assuming good intent. What do I mean by that? I mean, it's really just looking for the best in people and expecting it and assuming it. My nature is to say, okay, what's your angle? You tell me something, now show me the data that reinforces that. And that has its attributes that are quite helpful. But I'm not sure how good it is at building relationships. And so conceptually, this idea of expecting the best and assuming the best, do you get stung sometimes? Yeah, and that was hard for me, but I found that in the end, it's just a much better place. Assuming good intent, in my mind, is a lot like being able to forgive somebody. I had a partnership off. It wasn't a business partnership, but man, I was so frustrated and irritated. And you remember some of this stuff, Maddie. I come home and what I found was I was developing a cancer inside for this person. He didn't care. It wasn't keeping him up at night. He wasn't irritated by the whole thing. It was really just his nature. So if I can assume good intent, just like if I can forgive and let those things pass through me, I become healthier, I become happier, I'm nicer to be around. I know my wife, Wendy, had to have appreciated the fact when I could just start letting that partnership thing go. And so working on this concept of assuming good intent, forgiveness, and then I think that's a strong element of trust, which we kind of started with this get on board question. You know, to be able to develop a strong culture, we have to have trust. To be able to have trust, I have to know a little bit about who you are. When you share, I get to feel a little bit of who you are. You get to feel a little bit of who I am. We begin to build a trust. I understand every once in a while in our get on board questions, we'll have tears come up. Well, that's pretty powerful when you can be vulnerable and share that with me. And it gives me a chance to be vulnerable and share that back. Well, now, when it comes to crunch time, I'm going to be a little more supportive, and you're going to be a little more supportive of me. And so I think this concept of good intent, trust, and by the way, trust, when I say trust, yeah, it means I can count on you, but there's a very important element in trust that is married to that, and that's you're capable. You have the skill set that you need, or you're on your way to getting that skill set. So when I talk about trust, it means that you say what you do, but you know how to do. Do you know what I'm saying there? And so I think another element that comes into this, maybe this will be a good way to finish on this topic, but keeping your saw sharp. And I commend you for your education for this very reason, for being here when you don't need to be. As you figure out ways to grow and learn and keep your skill sets honed, boy, now you've got the whole package of an employee if you can marry those elements together.
So let me end with this before we have our students participate in this. What's your advice to these students beyond the sharpen your saw and develop trust?
Generally speaking, the things that are the most important to me are my family and my friends. And so it's easy in today's world of hustle and bustle to lose contact and to move on and to pay attention to our technology. But find those people that are important to you and hang on. Every year, just before the holidays, I sit down and review all of the relationships that I have. And there's a short list of who I want to strengthen and develop relationships, and I work very actively and very hard on that. My family right at the top, but my key friends are right there. And I have another list of people that I want out of my life that I don't want to spend any more time with, that are maybe deflating or creating other issues. And so I work on those two things. And so choose your friends very wisely. And Gavin, that we talked about earlier, my partner in 2 businesses, and we're just great friends. We're like brothers, and we have great success together. We don't always get along, but we mostly do. It just makes life so much richer. So I think this concept of friendship. Maybe one other thing I'd hit on. One of the more discouraging and frustrating things I hear is, well, it's just business, or in an opportunity with a client, we pull a sneaky one because it's business and expected. And I really, conceptually, it's hard to try to live 2 lives. You're gonna get to the medium level there. You're not going to be everything that you can be. And so as best we can, and it's not always easy, and I'm not perfect at this, and I'll claim to be, but as best we can, if we can be the person that we'd want to be to our parents or to others that we admire in all of our relationships, easier said than done. I mean, it is hard. But nevertheless, we keep that at the forefront of who we are, maintain our integrity, and try to do the right thing. Those are 2 things that come to mind. There are lots of others, but I feel really passionate about those.
That's great.
Yeah.
Great. So let's have some participation here. Who's got a question for Mark?
And remember, there's there's swag involved, right?
And we have mics in the back, yes? Great.
You said that, oh gosh. Hold it out. Yeah, is that good? Okay. You said that you have some daily huddles. I think you said it for like 10 minutes and you talked about your number one.
Yeah.
What do those huddles look like and what are the benefits that you get from them?
Yeah, so we start with my senior team, maybe 7 or 8 people at 8 a.m. It never lasts more than 10 minutes. That's very important. And the concept is to start the day off with what your number one thing is, so it gets everybody focused on what that's going to be, right? It might be a top client, it might be, you know, a team meeting that you got to nail a certain point on. And then your number one. And so, for example, for my CFO, I want to know how much cash we have in the bank that we can spend today. Every day he reports that. For my vice president of sales and operations, I want to know how many people we have out working. And then we look at the trends, right? Because every day now, I know what that number is, and if it's trending down, then we understand what we need to do, and so on if it's trending up. And then we share a piece of good news. And that's more about just kind of creating a positive energy for the day. So I guess the objective is to have an energetic, focused moment where we're thinking about the most important thing we're going to do and start with a little bit of good news. It's a good question. Thank you.
Let's go in the back there.
Yeah, so I mentioned Gavin. He came from this medical staffing company, and then he brought a relationship to us that had actually done a startup before in this world, and so we had a huge opportunity there. So we placed medical doctors across the United States. So for example, we placed a guy in Alaska in a location that no doctor wanted to go to. Well, he gets twice as much as anybody else would because he's willing to work in a desolate, isolated place. We have another doctor that we placed in Hawaii that makes much less than he could or would elsewhere. But you know, he's working 4 or 5 days a month, got a great location, and he's just going to work there for 3 months and fill in for a person. And so it's a very interesting business, a lot of moving parts. We're working on an opportunity right now that could double our business. We'll find out about that in the next week or so. I'm sitting on pins and needles. So it's really about placing temporary doctors, and we do some permanent placement too. We help them find permanent work, but just placing docs all around the United States. Very exciting. I say that, I mean, we've got 14 guys out working, but they're all over the place, so it's fun. Yeah.
Let's go right here in the front.
As a leader, especially in decision making, how do you deal with uncertainty?
That's a great question.
Yeah, it's a really good question. Leadership doesn't need to be lonely at the top. Sometimes we have to call the ball and make that awful decision or that great decision or that business-changing decision. But I find when somebody brings a difficult question to me, my first thing is to gather around 2 or 3 people that I value and know that have expertise in this area. And so it's typically a collaborative event. It doesn't necessarily mean that we'll do what they want to do or recommend. Most of the time it does. Sometimes we don't. So I think when it comes to difficult decisions, having people that you value and counsel around you. If it's a really tough one, I might end up going to my board, or I have a group of peers that I meet with regularly. It's like an informal board of directors, if you will. It's not related to the company. I spend a lot of time. So I think surrounding yourself with people that are smart and can be go-to people has been quite helpful. Yeah.
Great. Go ahead.
I currently work in the dental industry, and I've seen some of the staffing arrangements. There's several medical staffing companies out there.
Mm-hmm.
Without getting into industry specifics, what led you to that component that makes your company different? You feel a special niche that's allowing you to grow so quickly.
What differentiates us, maybe? Is that? It kind of goes back to that earlier question, did I know what I wanted to get into when I left college? For me, it's always been much more about an interesting opportunity than what that opportunity would be. We had the right people, and it's a booming industry. A lot of growth, driven from the ACA Act and all the healthcare initiatives. It turns out we're all getting older. So I think it was as much about, I talked about on the Ascend Medical team, having the skill sets in place. And so we've been able to lever those skills, exponentially. So it's the right people with the right connections. I think that the more interesting question that we have in the future, and that's a great question because I worry about it a lot, the differentiation piece. Where do we go? Is it going to be in our technology platform? Because right now, we've got all this energy based on relationships, and at some point, that's going to have to turn into more of a differentiator. And those are some of the strategic issues that we're working on. So ask me in 6 months. Right now, we've got a tiger by the tail based on all these wonderful relationships. Now, how do we make sure that we can lever that in the future when we have to train people, when we have to get more specialized, when the platform is more important to us? And so it's a very, very compelling arena, yeah.
In the back there.
What classes did you take outside of the business world in college that you felt profited you most as a business owner or entrepreneur?
Yeah. So it would have been not necessarily a class. My student government experience. And so just getting involved outside of your core curriculum, you'll meet greater friendships, you'll learn things in a different way. Like many of you, I took a broad range of classes, but I truly think, I'm trying to think, like I love my biology class, I love my business law class, but I think I got much more value out of things like the lab work or the thing I loved about the student government experience, or the clubs experience I was involved with too. I played soccer in the club. Just meeting new people and developing new friendships and gaining that insight. There's diversity in that, there's new perspective. Boy, that's great stuff.
Question up here.
How did your responsibilities as a CFO prepare you to be a CEO in the future?
I was a terrible CFO. So the best thing I ever did was get out of that seat. For the company too. Yeah, it's because we got somebody that knew what they were doing in there. Our issues back then were we were way behind on a contract. We actually took a run at becoming the international standard in image compression. So I don't know if any of you are familiar with MPEG or JPEG, but we came in second in that world. It was such an exciting time. It was all about managing that contract. We were way behind, we were way over budget. And so we were at least able to get those things in balance so the company could make money to prosper in the future. We had important partnerships. I think understanding the stressors and how much finance drives the world. When both of the initial companies I was involved with were cash starved, and so we had to be creative about how we made things work. And one of the huge lessons that came out of the CFO role was, no money is no fun. And as I've gotten older in our businesses, cash is precious. We grow it. We're very mindful of what we do. Both of these opportunities we've been able to fund internally because of our cash reserves. And so maybe the biggest lesson was that having cash, having free assets creates tons of opportunity. It's easy in today, relatively easy in today's economy to grow. These kind of rising tides bring all ships up. The times where it gets really difficult, the Great Recession, I don't know how many competitors we saw go out of business. And for us, managing and keeping a significant cash reserve made it possible for us to not only survive, but to look at opportunities, which we did. And so maybe it centers around this world about how important it is to be properly funded. Yeah, thanks.
Do you have another leader or a mentor that you really look up to, whether that be someone personally or maybe just someone who's been a great leader, maybe in a different organization?
Yeah. Yeah, several. One that comes to mind, Rick Baird, he's the president of the Bank of American Fork. In my first gig, he was one of our board members, and boy, he provided some counsel for me on integrity and doing the right thing early on in my career that was transformative. And so in my next gig, I brought him onto my board. He's a very close friend of mine, so smart guy, 10 years older than I am, 8 years older, and he's got a lot of wisdom and knowledge. I'm involved with a group called Young Presidents Organization, YPO, and it's a network of peers. So there are 50 people in our chapter, more or less, but and I'm in the graduating group now, YPO Gold. They say the G is silent. You get it? So imagine 8 or 10 professionals that are in different walks of life. We keep conflict out, so we're not in the same industry or we don't do business with each other, but we're consultants with each other. So this acquisition that I did, I got to get up and whiteboard the whole thing in front of 8 really, really smart guys and walk through, what I'm missing, what are the opportunities here. So it gets back to building those friendships because, I don't really have any lines anymore between business and personal because it's so nicely mixed together. And I really love that. So this whole idea of mentorships is top of my list. Good question. Yeah, please.
Go ahead.
So you mentioned a little bit about the recession. I'm wondering, in tough times, economic or otherwise, how does your business strategy change, or does it, to help keep you afloat?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it has to change. One of the most difficult things we went through in that Great Recession, I had to let my right-hand guy go. He was absolutely awesome in growing a business, but in this whole downturn thing, I mentioned the daily huddle. We have lots of other metrics and other things that we follow, but we know daily if our number's dropping. And if it starts dropping quickly, we've got to respond. In the Great Recession, there were many things outside of our control, and that meant making difficult changes in the organization, downsizing, making sure that we didn't lose money and lose the entire company. And so our focus became more internal, making sure that we were operationally efficient, that we were lean with the number of people that we needed to have. Just awful stuff. But nevertheless, living to fight another day. And, then the challenge is as you start growing again, you kind of inculcate in this whole world of save money, be very conservative, be mindful of the risks you take and so on, and trying to shift gears and get that mentality going again towards growth it's a fun exercise. But yeah, kind of keeping your finger on the pulse. Is the next one starting? Where are we going from here? Yeah, thanks.
There's a question back there.
Speak up just a little bit, sorry.
Books.
What books? Oh, yeah, great question. So my favorite book, well, I'll tell you about the ones that have been kind of, maybe the 3 or 4 that made the biggest difference, and remind me to tell you about the one that I love right now. Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. I go back to that book all the time. Good to Great. I met Jim Collins, and attended his seminars, and boy, we made some great change in our organization there. 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. I love that book. It drives this whole concept of building trust within the organization and what kind of power you can work with that. So maybe those are 3 that are the classics that I turn to a lot. The one that I keep going back to, in fact, I was reading again yesterday, The Road to Moral Character. And I think Dean Anderson actually recommended that book to me. And so I just find, boy, each time I highlight more stuff. And
Road to Character.
The Road to Character.
David Brooks.
David Brooks,
Yeah.
correct,
Yeah.
sorry.
Yeah.
So I love that book. It just talks about doing the right thing and how it pays dividends. Wonderful stuff, yeah.
Let's see, one more question. There we go.
Is this going to be a good question, like a great question, because you're wrapping it up for us?
No pressure.
You'll be the judge for that.
Okay.
You kind of went over it a little bit with his question, but as a leader, what are some of the ethical dilemmas that you run into with your employees within your own company, as well as you work with the medical industry, which is kind of a little bit complex.
Yeah.
So what are some of the ethical dilemmas you run into, and how do you deal with them?
One of my tough experiences I got between our largest shareholder in the business and who was really controlling the purse strings. I'd been with the business for 3 months. And he wanted an accounting of where the money had gone, and it wasn't where he thought it had gone. And the governance above me was talking about how to make this work out so we didn't lose the business. And I mentioned this experience with Rick Beard, my board member that had such a strong influence on me. I mean, I was losing sleep over this. I was single. If I lost a job, you know, I'm young, I can recover. But we had families in our business, and what I said was going to make a difference with them. And in the end, and thank goodness for Rick, but good counseling, you know, you just do the right thing and sort it out later. And so we did, and it was very difficult for me. I got a lot of pressure from above. It was an interesting experience. The right-hand guy for this investor, I visited with him a few years later. He actually served on my board for a while. He knew what had happened, and had we not done exactly what we did, we would have lost the business that day. Now, I can tell you stories where the exact opposite happened. We pulled a fast one for a client that was so outside the bounds of what we do, and I went and apologized for that, and we made another company look bad for something that we did. It's just not the right thing, and we create enough trouble in our own lives accidentally. It's just not worth it to purposefully create this kind of skeletons in the closet, if you will. You know, who you are, you find that when you wake up one day, you're surrounded by those same kind of people. And if you love and you laugh and you're happy, or if you're a shyster and you're crooked and you do things that aren't, that's just going to be who you become. In this case, I went and talked to the client about, they're one of the largest users of temporary staffing in the state. Went and talked to them about what happened. It wasn't our competitor's fault, it was our fault. She basically says, get your stuff and get out and don't ever talk to me again. And we have never done business with them again. And you know, that was maybe 3 or 4 or 5% of our business at the time, and could be 10% today. So while it doesn't always end the way you hope it would, I think if you can begin with the intent of who you are and what you want to be and how you want to get there, and don't waver from that, in the end it just pays huge dividends. So great question. Good one to end on. Thank you.
That's a great question, and thank you, Mark.
Yeah, you're right.
You know, I think the one thing that obviously came through here is, and what I wrote down of a leadership lesson from you is assume good intent.
Yeah.
And it may sound simple, and it ties together with our pillar of ethical leadership, but
Yeah.
in some ways it's maybe the hardest thing that we can do, right?
Yeah.
So thank you,
Yeah.
Mark, for joining us on Friday.
It's been a pleasure to be with Aggies. Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you all.